Excellent. Thank you so much. Dr. Elizabeth Strand is the founding director of veterinary social work at the University of Tennessee College of Veterinary Medicine in Knoxville, Tennessee, in the US. She is a licensed clinical social worker, a family therapist, a grief counselor, a mediator, a mindfulness-based stress reduction teacher, and if that wasn't enough hats that she wears, she's also an ordained interfaith minister. She is clearly coming at her research with a very interdisciplinary background. Her professional mission is to encourage the humane treatment of both people and animals, and to care for those professionals who care for animals in their daily lives and in their work. I will hand the floor over to Dr. Strand.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can keep.
Thank you so much. I just want to say I'm so thankful to be able to join you today, and I feel particularly grateful to be sharing these words with you at the end, but before our panel discussion. It has been fascinating to be here. It's not on my bio, but I have a true love of technology, and and yeah, so thank you. I really appreciate being here. So what I'll be covering today is a little different. I'm going to talk with you about what vet social work is, and then talk about the transdisciplinary imperative and problem that we've heard people talk about some today. I'm going to offer a tool called Liberating Structures as one way to manage this transdisciplinary imperative and problem. And then I'll share some information with you from my work that is of a transdisciplinary nature and that relates to the topic of today's webinar. And then lastly, I am going to hopefully represent one of the virtues that I'm going to talk about as a necessity for transdisciplinary work by asking a research question. So we'll be using polls. So get your phones out if you're willing to take a picture of a QR code. And once you're in the poll, you won't have to do that again. And I am a very novel, I know just enough about brains. So we'll talk a little bit about brains because I think it's fascinating, and I think AI and technology and the way that it can influence the way brains function is just really, really turns me on, makes me fascinated. Okay, so what is veterinary social work? So we've been around since 2002, and we basically do research, education, and service in these four main areas. The first is animal-related interactions and experiences. The next is harm to humans and harm to animals and sort of the co-occurrence of those. Certainly animal-related grief and bereavement, and it could be tempting to think that's like about puppies and kitties, but I have done a lot of work around depopulation and the impact on grief for large animal depopulation for caregivers, producers, and veterinarians. And then certainly intentional well-being, which I'll just do a little foreshadowing, is really important for things like farmer stress. Many of you have talked about the demands on farmers. And so that certainly falls into what we do in veterinary social work. We are inherently interprofessional. We are veterinary and social work, so we don't work in independent silos. We master how to work transdisciplinarily because we believe that we're better together, that when we're able to bring our disciplines together, we can come up with solutions that no one profession could have done on its own. So let's start with the first thing I need to know from you is, what is your profession? Would you mind to jump into the Slido here, and you could put your phone and take a picture of that QR code, and it will take you to the slide and to the poll. And then you can also, if you prefer, just go to slido.com. And at the top of that website, you can type in that number, 3706577, and it'll also take you to the polls. So we've got a veterinarian, we have research and teaching. Could you share what discipline, like what would you say your degree is in? Yeah. You're a student, okay, great. That's a beautiful role. What are you studying? Yeah, keep going, guys. This is great. So what your role is and what you're teaching. Okay, we got computer science, nice. Feedlot researcher, nice. So I'm imagining that maybe that's animal science, professor in animal science, biosystems agricultural engineering, nice. There we go. Animal welfare research scientist, a student pursuing bioveterinary science, nice. Research, aquaculture, nutrition, wow. PhDs, cattle health, beef producer, agriculture research professional, nice. Industry professional, animal welfare in the egg industry. Yes, we just did some work around HPAI and depopulation for those folks. Economics and business, applied livestock, animal welfare, veterinarian, educator, veterinary technician in Department of Animal Science, nice. Animal science, nicely done, everybody. Thank you for participating. We've got a great distribution. I will say that I'm by myself. It doesn't look like there's any other social scientists here. So I'm really, maybe I'm missing that, but I'm really thankful to be with you all. Okay, let's keep going. So veterinary social work does fall into this area of One Health. We particularly like One Welfare, love that. We call One Health, or our tagline at UT is uniting disciplines to promote and protect all life on Earth. In 2003, we became a center, and our vision is attending to the welfare of all species through excellence in global interprofessional practice. Now, we're not the first, of course, to talk about the importance of veterinarians and mental health professionals working together. This is Boris Levinson. He's known as the father of family therapy, of animal-assisted therapy. And he wrote, since the relationship between men and his pets has changed, the function of the veterinarian must also be transformed. The veterinarian can no longer limit himself solely to safeguarding the physical health of the family pet. Now he must become involved in the mental health of the family whose pet he treats. This trend is so inexorable that eventually veterinarians will become members of mental hygiene teams. That's what they called folks like me back then in the late 60s. But the problems of interprofessional functions will not be insurmountable. No one group should retain a monopoly on the mental health of our population. And we know that the world has this strategic plan for working across disciplines, because no one discipline can take care of the well-being by itself. This was mentioned earlier in one of our speakers' presentations, the Sustainable Development Goals. And we could drill down and say each of these goals is what we call a wicked problem, a problem that is difficult or impossible to solve because of an incomplete, contradictory, or changing requirements that are often difficult to recognize. If we think about wicked problems, it is an operational definition. And we think about things like solutions are not right or wrong, but better or worse. So the topic of animal welfare and people's definitions around that has come up a few times. The problems are never completely solved. That's like in what I'm hearing today, it's kind of like you can't eat once and for all. Making sure that people are well and animals are well is an ongoing issue. It's not a solved problem. Multiple stakeholders with conflicting agendas certainly has an impact here. So wicked problems, continues to grow in the research literature as something that is getting discussed. This is a reflection of citations with the term wicked problems in the title or in the abstract since 1980 to 2020. And we know that if we say that all of these sustainable development goals are in and of themselves, I think a more gentle way that people are talking about are calling them grand challenges. I'm a child of the 80s, and so we liked the term wicked. So, but they all are, anchored in these sustainable development goals, and they do require transdisciplinary innovation we say that in this paper, it's talking about a global level, that we have to drill down, nitty gritty, human beings with different disciplines coming together to share their expertise to solve problems. And what is exciting about today is that this includes the use of technology and AI. Oh my gosh, yeah, very exciting. Transdisciplinarity is defined a couple of ways. We'll start with just disciplinary, of course, as we think about strawberries being with strawberries, bananas with bananas, and so forth. Multidisciplinaries you might have like in one building, you have like a veterinary technician, a veterinarian, and a social worker, but they don't necessarily work together. Multidisciplinaries like fruit salads, then we kind of do work together, and we have this fruit salad juice, that's like marriage of the different disciplines. But transdisciplinarity is like the smoothie where we drop our professional boundaries. And what I would argue is that we never live here in smoothie land, that we must respect and defer to each other's disciplinary boundaries. But we have these moments of aha when we move into smoothie land, and it becomes clear that we can't figure out who had the idea, but some other idea emerges from that work together that solves a real wicked problem. Another definition, which I think is very relevant to the concept of animal welfare, is the degree to which we include non-academic participants. So in this model, transdisciplinarity is when you do include non-academic participants. And if you're high in transdisciplinarity, you include them, but they're also highly integrated into the work. So I've heard in one of our presentations that sometimes the research that is done around issues of animal welfare doesn't scale up as well to operations themselves. So to what degree can we conduct research that does include, the larger production facilities that where the work is actually getting done? Additionally, this issue of integrating non-academic partners is particularly relevant and is kind of what inspired me to move more into this embracing of multidisciplinarity and mastering transdisciplinarity work. Because of when we went through the pandemic, there was this big thrust of I can think for myself no longer, and with technology and YouTube and podcasts like Big Think or other podcasts where lay folks are being able to get information about science, some of it good, some of it not, but either way, the idea that I am going to sit back and have a one-way communication with you as the expert and me as the receiver, those days are not as present anymore, that we struggle with folks being like, I can think for myself. I do not need to listen to what you say. And our ability to navigate that effectively, I think, is really important for applying and making progress in integrating things like AI and computers in farm animal welfare. So we think about the level of participatoriness, we can have it be just informing the public, but we can all the way move to the highest over here, empowering, where we will implement what you decide, where public are guiding the whole trajectory. We'll work with you to ensure that your concerns and aspirations are directly reflected in the alternatives developed, and provide feedback on how the public input influence the decision. So these types of interventions are growing in things like broader impact requirements from the National Science Foundation, for instance. When they fund a project, they want to know, how are you making sure that this is going to be implemented and you're engaging public in the discovery, because of this issue of, I can think for myself. Yeah, I can get information and I can decide if it's relevant or not. And E.O. Wilson speaks about this in his book. He spoke about it in his book, Consilience, where he recognizes that environmental policy, social science, biology, and ethics all come together, and that in this center spot, there's almost no map for how to make progress. But what we do know is that if we're not integrating all of these, it's very difficult to implement consilient solutions. So what is consilience? I am my first most marketable skill as a undergrad was Latin. So I was a Latin teacher. I still love Latin. So it comes from ideology of consilience comes from salio salire, to spring, leap, or jump or bound together. So you're not thinking ahead, you're just jumping in, right? And con is together with. So basically it is to leap in together. And I don't know about you, but I have definitely found myself on an ill-prepared multidisciplinary team where we were all leaping together, and it didn't go so well. So this call for transdisciplinarity is just growing. Again, we have the term transdisciplinarity in the titles or abstracts of research projects, and you can see that it continues to grow. But what I would argue is that we can say, yes, we need to have transdisciplinary teams, and funding agencies can say you need to have transdisciplinary research. But how? Sometimes I think we're putting the cart before the horse. The how to do it, I think, deserves attention. So let me just ask you, have you ever been on a multidisciplinary team that struggled to do its work? You should just be able to jump in here now without following the QR code again. So we've got about 50-50. Good. Keep them coming just a little bit. Nice. We have really, what I would say is, in our population of attendees, we have folks that have the ability to naturally demonstrate what we might call interdisciplinary virtues, and I'll share with you a little bit more about what those virtues are. So we've got about 29% of respondents. We got 14 respondents say agree, 43% say disagree, that they have struggled, that they've been on teams that have struggled in their work. Let me ask you this. Have you ever experienced being misunderstood on a multidisciplinary team due to being from a different profession? Agree, yeah. I don't have a neutral in this one, sorry about that. This is nice. I'm learning about the group of folks that have come. So for the folks that are responding, you're saying that you have experienced that disconnect of being misunderstood because someone didn't understand your discipline, but you were on teams that were able to surmount it, to get through it. That's awesome. Let me just ask you this last question. Maybe it's because I'm a social worker, but if you did have an experience of being misunderstood, what was the valence level like that for you? So you can see on the right here, you loved it. It was wonderful being misunderstood. And that is definitely a virtue, versus I didn't like it so much. It was kind of icky. I didn't like it it was a hard moment. Yeah, good. So somewhere in the middle, it's sort of like, meh, yeah, good. So here's what I'm fascinated by. So, and our sample is so small. And of course, you guys, these folks that are here with us, already have like a willingness for an interest in interdisciplinarity and so forth. What would happen, and how could technology be used to move this 43% to up here at the highest, or like the smiling, because if our nervous systems as human beings are in a socially engaged, safe state, even when we are misunderstood around our professional identities that we're very passionate about, what would that do for discovery? That's one of my little research questions. Happily, that research question and the skills that are necessary for really getting to the place where we all feel excited about being misunderstood instead of some version of ugh, from a valence perspective, is getting attention. So this is about virtues. So let me just take a moment and say, what are virtues? This is from Epictetus, who was a Stoic. To live a life of virtue is when your thoughts, words, and deeds match up. So that's Epictetus. And here are some of the virtues that some qualitative research looking at multidisciplinary teams, interdisciplinary teams, identified as present on really highly functional teams. Things like intellectual humility. And there are definitely grant money to to research intellectual curiosity and intellectual humility as necessary components of working across disciplines. The social virtues like friendship and collaborative spirit, sense of humor, and then intellectual virtues like empathy, respect, trust, and generosity are part of what is included in working well across disciplinary, included in implementing transdisciplinarity. There's also things like the inner development goals. I don't know if you know this, but there's the sustainable development goals. There's recognition that requires a set of qualities as human beings to work well across disciplines. And so they've broken them down through a research process, a global research process, into some particular skills that we have to have as human beings to solve these wicked problems together. And then the interprofessional education collaborative identifies 4 areas of competence. We have to have attention to our values and ethics, roles and responsibilities, communications, and teamwork to work well across disciplines. The ethics are particularly important. For instance, in my profession, we put a central role on human relationships. So you can see I've spent a lot of time talking about the human side of things. As a social worker, we also have a core value of looking at things as people and environments. We almost never think of a human being just as an insular, organic entity. We are constantly assessing whatever problems arise is an interaction between a human being and their environment. So what would be some guidelines or ethical codes that govern your discipline, or one that you think is relevant to today's topic that would be guiding a person's decision-making and thought processes as they come to these questions around computers in farm animal welfare? I know I'm going fast, but do no harm. Okay, right. So then we had the first where we had the 5 freedoms. Then we had I think they were called the 5 domains. Certainly veterinary medicine was mentioned. So there's the veterinary ethical code. What kinds of, there was discussion of how hard it is to get through, ethics board reviews, both for IACUC and IRB. So animal welfare codes, good. UK government guidelines, good. Respect for the animals we work with, great. Positive enrichment, yeah. Data privacy, the 3 R's, great. Love it. Yep, exactly. So, speaking only on areas you have qualifications for. I love that one so much. We have this whole thing in veterinary social work, stay in your lane. Stay in your lane and don't go beyond your scope of practice. That's so great that that's written in there. The 3 R's, great. So all I want to bring to the table is that when we are approaching bringing disciplines together, and we've got multiple disciplines that are interested in this topic, knowing the drivers that make me say what I say, or make you say what you say, or get really persnickety about a particular issue. If we can know that about each other, it can help us get to transdisciplinarity or smoothiehood a lot quicker. Have empathy, right? So these are nice virtues. And things like empathy are definitely part of those inner development goals. And so I hope you'll check those resources out. One of my hopes for my talk is that you might find some resources that you want to go snoop around and look into a little bit more. So there is to accomplish this, of what I've been sort of preaching here, is this thing called APT research, or APT methodology. So these are methodologies that are adaptive, participatory, and transdisciplinary. They are designed to attend to wicked problems, and they're growing in the research literature as a way to solve these types of problems. So a tool to get there for apt research is something called, this is one, there's so many different, but this is one that I like particularly because it's open access. It's called Liberating Structures. Liberating Structures introduces tiny shifts in the way we meet, plan, decide, and relate to one another. They put the innovative power once reserved for experts only in the hands of everyone. This is the basic model where we have centralized control, where you have kind of like experts have control versus distributed control, where this is when we acknowledge that the public has some control, like in terms of what they buy from a farmer. So there's that kind of recognition as well. Then we have the number of people. Is it one person who's got the floor, or does everybody have the floor? So Liberating Structures tries to hit this spot over here where you have distributed control and everybody is participating in some form or fashion. So right now I'm using Slido as one example of how technology can be used to gather people's opinions quickly and efficiently. And then if we do that, how can that be used to move a particular perspective forward with buy-in? Because you kind of know if you have people that are going to be barriers to what you're trying to accomplish or not. So this is just this polling technique is just one simple way. Oftentimes when we have distributed control, we might have a town hall, for instance, or social media, Facebook or YouTube. This is where there's an open discussion. And in here, you usually have the loudest, angriest person take control of the conversation. So we think about animal rights, folks maybe that are pushing forward a narrative, and they have control over what people are viewing because there's distributed control in one person, the loudest person is kind of influencing things. Down here, we have kind of, when we have a presentation like I'm doing today or a managed discussion, we have one person that's kind of in charge and there's centralized control. We need all of these, but growing in our skills around these, I think is relevant to what can be accomplished with computer technology in farm animal welfare, especially when it's related to public opinion. This is just some resources around liberating structures. I don't know if we'll get to share our slides after the fact, but that's a QR code that takes you to it. And it is already being used quite substantially in efforts for sustainability. And it's free. That's the best bit about it. So a little story for you. My brother is a botanist, and I promise this is all going to come together. So he's a botanist, but he also got really into genetics because of plants and genetics, you know, that goes together. And then he's a statistician, and he got really interested in how mussels kind of move, like, mussels like that you can eat. And so I was talking to him. I was at his house and we were talking. I was like, oh my gosh, don't you want to know what the mussel farmer thinks about the migration of mussels? I was like, yeah, don't you want to talk to the farmer? And he was like, I want nothing to do with that. Why would you? That's the stupidest idea. Why would you ask me that? No, I don't want to talk with the farmer. And I shared this with another colleague who's an academic, associate dean of research and kind of really more of a vice chancellor kind of fella. And he said, oh yeah, there's deep science, our ability to go deeply into a narrow specific area of expertise. And then there are folks that are wide science, or folks that are interested in larger contexts or crosses deep ties together and ties deep science together. So I would imagine, I don't know if this is true, but I would imagine in our group here, we might have a lot of more wide scientists, but let's just see, where do you most like to be? So if you do one, if you click one, then it is, I think, 1 star. Yeah, then you're a deep scientist. You're very disciplinarily focused. If you are wide, then you're 10. So where would you say you fall? You're most happiest. I mean, we can function in all sorts of settings, but where do you get turned on? Basically, is where I'm saying. Like, where do your eyes get kind of shiny? Yeah. Because some folks they just love to be like in their lab. It like brings them great joy, and dealing with the people bit is, I'm going to do it because I need to, but it's not really where I get my most joy. Yeah. Nice. So we have a nice little distribution here. We've got a few folks that are in 3s, and we've got more 8s. Yeah, a couple are way wide at 10. That's great. So we need all of us on these multidisciplinary teams. We need deep scientists on the teams. We also need wide brokers of knowledge, wide scientists as well. And I think that higher education has done a beautiful job really emphasizing and rewarding deep science, but our world requires wide science solutions through transdisciplinary efforts. And so being able to both affirm and reward events like today, where so many of us from different disciplines are coming with curiosity around a particular question, is really essential. This is the brain bit. So this is from Ian McGilchrist, who is a neuropsychiatrist, talking about the difference between the right brain and the left brain. So the right brain is broad, open, vigilant, and alert. So if we think about right brain is being able to look broadly for things versus left brain is I'm going to look for things that I already know exist, and I'm going to focus deeply for attention to detail. And so deep science often is quite left brain, and it has to be, because it has to rely on things already known to go even deeper. Whereas breakthrough solutions oftentimes have to come from a very broad perspective of bringing different things together that you wouldn't think would go together. Yeah. So, and AI, of course, has great potential for being able to do that for us as human beings as well. So to learn more about Ian McGilchrist's work, this is his book, and there's a great YouTube video about it. And here, and I would say that it is something that I think is going to be continuing to grow in supporting higher education success in scientific breakthroughs for wicked problems, like, and the way that today, for instance, computer human interactions and farm animal welfare can move forward some wicked problems that have kept things slowed maybe for some time. So I'm going to share with you now some relevant findings from multidisciplinary projects that I'm on. The first one I'm going to share is from a NIFA Ideas Grant. The PI on this grant is Jennifer Van Oos from the University of Wisconsin, and the topic is building public trust in dairy farming, understanding the role of farm culture training and risk factors that lead to poor animal handling. This is the first paper, and it compares industry and public perceptions of dairy cow handling situations. So we used a series of videotapes and asked folks to watch the video clips and answer questions about their perceptions. At the end of those, people were given the opportunity to join a focus group. And so my job was to conduct the focus groups, and I'm currently doing the thematic analysis for them. So I picked out some quotations that were related to a question around technology. So this is a dairy professional who says, I would say that everything has changed over the last 53 years. I think incidents of abuse handling is probably less, but awareness of it is much greater. It's at two ends of the spectrum. There's a lot more light being shown on any incident with the use of cameras and videos as opposed to 50 years ago, when it was probably much more common but less known about. So this is a simple way that technology, just the presence of cameras, has influenced the way that this dairy farmer perceives that things have changed. In kind of a spectrum, you know, some really, really good, some really, really challenging. And another professional writes, I think there's some accountability when people are on camera, and there's also some ability for the dairymen to mitigate their risk by having cameras and artificial intelligence that's looking at, is this person really hitting an animal, or are they just adjusting their head? You know, I mean, they're really looking at some nuances of how we move animals, not just identifying something like that's just mistreatment right at the get-go, right? So we're able to really challenge these kind of pat misperceptions that the general public may have about what is healthy, normal handling that is misperceived, and gives the opportunity to maybe provide education that has relevance to general public. Another one writes, just around technology in general, people don't necessarily understand that a milker with an automatic detacher, they don't know about that. My point is they don't necessarily understand that those things are done for the cow as well as for the safety of that animal in terms of the cow's well-being. Again, we look at the cost of that technology and someone's going to have to pay for that. It's going to have to be the consumer. So now we're starting to move into the stressors of the ways in which the professional life of a farmer impacts the livelihood of the farmer, him or herself. And then this one, I'll just share a story. We hired a parts guy, and he's not from an ag background. At first, he was like, oh, this is going to be a chill job. I'm just going to sit here, and it's going to look like everybody's just ready to retire. Then a week or two later, he goes, you guys, there's so much technology and so many parts. You got to know your stuff. And there's laughter. He was just blown away at the technology and the amount of expertise in electronics that we use on dairy farms. That went from 1 week to another week of totally changing what he thought on farms, because he had just thought it was this mom and pop kind of just having a milking cows, but it was very surprising how much science is used in the whole thing. So so then so now I'm going to move. So that's one aspect of multidisciplinary team perception of technology from dairymen and the general public. And now drilling a little deeper into my profession as a social worker and suicide prevention or stress among farmers and what technology has to do with that. Well, if we think about the barriers to helping farmers stress, we know that farmers are experiencing significant stress, that does seem to be a little higher suicide rate. So this research looked at that there are barriers to seeking care, mental health care. There's acceptable messaging that reduces stigmatizing accessing mental health care, that the information has to be accessible, and it has to emphasize you're not alone. Well, you know, accessing mental health care is not easy. And so it's projected that digital mental health will continue to grow. There is efficacy studies around it. It can be quite effective. And so an example of a project is just developing a web application. We started in 2017. It's been up and running since 2020, called Lifeboat. And it basically matches peers to humanely embrace people who are experiencing emotional distress and suicidal thoughts, and promote local help-seeking behavior. And the model, the technology hasn't been used before. It's anonymous, so people can really speak without worried about their stigma. And it also can be quite draining to help someone who is experiencing suicidality. So our model is that we gather 3 volunteers. So in applying to farmer stress, 3 farmers who maybe have lived experience with mental health issues, connecting with one person that is in distress, and they create a little community where they support each other. And we're just starting to do our program evaluation data on that right now. So, but that's an example of from a social worker's perspective on farmers being healthy and well, and how that impacts the interactions with animals, and the ways that technology can help farmers be healthy and well. But then it does bring me to this, which is I want to ask a wide science question. So I'm definitely a wide scientist. And I'm going to make a little story about my brother again. So my brother, when I was young, said, science starts with moments that make you go, you know, I wonder about that. And so here's what I wonder. When I'm taking a risk, and I'm going to be, I'm representing an example of intellectual courage and intellectual perseverance, because I do not have the answer to this question. I only have a few little papers, and I'm just wondering if there's anything here. You all know, I don't know. So here's my question. So there's this thing called cardiac coherence. It's also baroreflex. It's when we as human beings breathe at 5.5 or 6.5 breaths per minute. There's a little typo there. And when we do that, over time, it basically it kind of helps to balance the autonomic and the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. And this has positive impacts on human emotional regulation and valence. So, and we have these apps, you've got apps probably on your phone. If you've got a Fitbit, you've got this flower that goes up and down to track your breathing. And my Aura ring every night gives me a reading on my heart rate variability. So we know that when I have higher heart rate, when my heart rate variability is in a state of cardiac coherence, it is associated with feelings of well-being. So then, okay. So maybe that is true. We do have data to support that. And then this is a 2019 article that inter and intraspecies communication of emotion signals as a neglected medium. I am totally outside of my lane. So the person that said, stay in your scope, I humbly, with intellectual humility, I am outside of my lane, but I do get to ask questions. That's part of being a good interdisciplinarian. I do get to ask questions. I did see a paper that talked about horses being able to smell human beings' fear, and dogs maybe. So I think some of you know answers to that. Okay, then there's the other paper, guided breathing at the resonance frequency, which is the 5.5, the 4.5 or 6.5 breaths per minute with haptic sensors. So it was like a physical sensor, potentiates or helps create cardiac coherence. So this is, we can intentionally utilize breathing apps or haptic signals to cause us to intentionally choose and pace our breath. And then lastly, artificial intelligence was able to read HRV and predict emotions of human beings objectively. So to what degree does influencing human emotion with breathing have any possible impact on human and animal welfare on farms, and to what degree can technology help with that? So there's my little question that may be irrelevant, but I took a stab at it. And thank you so much for your attention. And that's my talk for today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Strand. That was really, really interesting. There was lots and lots to unpack in that presentation. Both very different perspectives, but also there was a lot of overlap in what's been talked already, as you mentioned. Are there questions for the audience, for Dr. Strand? I think we do have. Oh, someone says wonderful. Does anybody have any answers to the very last question? Because I don't. But that was a really good question in terms of being able to think about techniques that social workers use for human well-being and human welfare, improving human welfare. Are there opportunities there to use some of those techniques for reducing stress in animals and generally improving welfare? And certainly people coming at it from a biology perspective, an animal biology perspective, would know what those techniques might be. But yeah. I think you're onto something in terms of trying to figure out, just in terms of maybe the autonomic reflexes and the autonomic system of animals. Are there ways technology can be used to, help them, the equivalent of helping them do box breathing or yes.
Yeah, I think now there are scientists in the room that I know that have the answer to this. I think HRV is less reflective of emotion in non-human species than human species. I think people may have the answer to that. I think my sense so far from looking and talking to some of my colleagues is that it's not a reliable predictor of valence in animals.
Right. Yes. Well, it actually, your example reminded me of Dr. Mancini's discussion of the unique habitat for tigers. Yeah. So actually giving them that more natural types of behavior to reduce the type of stressors that we typically see in a captive environment. That's very similar. So can you actually induce behavior to reduce their stress by providing them a different kind of environment?
Yes. And one that keeps popping up for me is the speaker before me. I apologize that I'm not remembering the name right now, but just emphasizing that it's things that are outside of the norm, novel things that create the stress. Yeah. And I'm just thinking about, the degree to which our behavior as human beings can be improved if we have higher HRV in our interactions with animals. Like how do I function when I'm stressed out versus when I'm in a state of coherence in terms of my behavior, how it impacts animals. I don't know the answer to that, but curious.
It's definitely a provoking question. I also thought that your perspectives on transdisciplinary research, which are really relevant to moving the needle in this area. And we need experts from each of these different disciplines to work in a really productive, meaningful, and respectful way together. I think that that's something I know as a computer scientist myself that I often struggle with, connecting with. There's a lot of push right now, at least in Canada, lots of push for interdisciplinary grants, multidisciplinary grants, transdisciplinary grants. And I actually really thank you very much for the slide you had on actually what the difference between those terms were. That was very helpful. But the reality is, as you say, a lot of us don't really know, we're not really trained in how to actually do that kind of research. And that is a barrier. Like, we haven't really talked about that fundamental barrier to actually doing the kind of research that's been talked about all day today, where we need people interacting with the farmers, we need technologies interacting with the people who know the animal science. There are funding models out there to do that, but the reality is we often just don't get as far as we could get, I think, just because we're not trained to do that. We have our disciplinary training. And so do you know of, I guess, opportunities to help groups that want to work together,
Yes.
and good ways to train and for us to get those skills?
Yes, I think the first thing is, I think it's good to look into liberating structures because it's free. And if you read it, you just start to get a sense of, oh, I probably could do that. It's meant to empower everyday folks to help with transdisciplinarity. That's the first thing. The second is that there's the International Science of Team Science work meeting that's happening at the beginning of August. And before we drop off today, I'll drop the link in the chat. It would be good to send somebody from your units to that meeting to learn about some of the science of team science research. And you can also network there to find people who specialize in team science. You can, like, I'm on an NSF grant that we're just wrapping up, and my job was consilience facilitator. So my job was to watch teams and help them. We're hitting a moment where you all are kind of coming to a place where you're not being able to break through a disciplinary boundary. And let's not waste time with that. Let's use a couple of little skills to help you see where each other are coming from. So, I think interdisciplinary research could just be, it's not that it's bad, but if we just fertilized it, with like some very particular skills, I think the results could be exponential. Yeah. So those are the two things I would say: liberating structures, and then I'll drop the science of team science information in the chat.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay. Here is a question online from Chow. I'm wondering, in your career as veterinary social worker, do you see different mental issues for different levels of farmers, like farm owners versus managers versus actual stock persons? that work with animals on the front line and how we can go about addressing them better, although they're all sometimes referred to as farmers.
Yes. You know, there's a little bit of research, and the one that comes to mind right now is in raising pigs, that those that were in the nursery it was much harder for them to go through depopulation than those that were working with the finishers. It was hard for everybody, but those that were the nursemaids of the baby piglets struggled more with it. I think that and again, my expertise really right now is around issues of depopulation and the mental health impact of that. So that's where most of my research has been recently. And I think that the responsibility, the feelings of responsibility for farm workers, that those that are have more responsibility or more power in that structure, I think that creates also an emotional impact as well. You know, I'm in the veterinary setting, so I also am aware of how those types of problems on farms impact veterinarians when they are having to recommend depopulation of a herd or a flock, and the way in which the public misperceives it, and how the public can become quite violent, in fact, towards those that are having to not only face depopulation of their animals, but also be judged for it, is it's just really, really challenging. So humbly, that's what I would say about that question. I would love your opinion if you want to verbalize it or drop it in the chat, because I'm always learning. So thank you.
Maybe one quick question before we move on to the next session. In terms of going about evolving this particular stream, bringing together the HCFAI, human, computer, farm animal technology interactions, while we are looking at integrating sociological perspectives, veterinary perspectives, what are the ways new policies can be developed, or maybe certain advocacy efforts can be unraveled? Are there any blind spots or specific pathways we can move forward?
So you're asking about the moving forward with policies that would have an impact on farm animal welfare, and particularly human-computer interactions in farm animal welfare. Yes, okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So to me, the thing that I'm the most concerned about, based on listening to farmers talk in multiple dairy industry and sow industry, and a little bit in the poultry industry, I'm really worried about how public opinion and public dissent around farming practices interfere with coming up with effective policy, because we're in a reactive state about not wanting to do or say something because we don't want to stir up the public ire. And so that, I think, limits our ability to use evidence-based science that is also deeply connected to participatory integration with public opinion, to come up with policies that are not reactive, but proactively attending to concerns of all stakeholders.
Yeah. That kind of resonate with what Dr. Boyden made some statements today morning in the presentation. Yes. Farmers are providers of food, and we don't want to create a negative impression. It's all about the perceptions and so on. It's a lot to explore, and a deep dive, and look for opportunities to collaborate and co-create new ways and methods to move forward. Yes. It's really a fantastic talk, Dr. Strand, and it's super engaging. We really enjoyed the two-way interactions with the Slido. Thank you so much.
Thank you.